Hey, Chris, Officer Coonrod for the police department. Pretty good. So, do you have any idea where your wife is?
In the summer of 2018, the familicide case of the Watts family sent shockwaves throughout the country when it was determined that the missing woman from Frederick, Colorado, named Shanann Watts, had in fact been killed by her husband, Chris Watts, along with their 2 young daughters. What follows is a case of profound horror and bone-chilling brutality. The revelation that Chris Watts was responsible for the disappearance of his own beautiful, sweet suburban family was particularly harrowing due to the manner in which the case played out in the media in its early stages, meaning Chris Watts gave interviews on local news stations pleading for the safe return of his wife and children. Following these interviews, countless unsettling facts cropped up, one after another, beginning with footage from the family's Ring doorbell camera, which showed Shanann Watts returning home well after 1 a.m. on the night of August 13th, 2018, but never leaving the home again, alive, that is. That in mind, here are some of the most chilling facts about the Watts family annihilation that took investigators and the public by storm.
He's so disgusting. I'm so ashamed of him.
Why? How? I don't even understand how you could, bring yourself to do that to somebody who's, that big.
Lo and behold, Chris Watts was cheating on his wife. I mean, who could have seen that coming, right? During the missing persons investigation involving Shanann and her children, it was discovered that Chris Watts had been having an extramarital affair for quite some time with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger. Nicole and Chris met while working at a company called Anadarko Petroleum. They struck up a relationship that would ultimately influence Chris to annihilate his entire family as a means of escape, thereby enabling him to be with his mistress in peace. Consequently, many suspect that Nicole Kessinger encouraged Chris to dispatch his entire family, but as of today, Nicole has officially been cleared of all allegations and was never formally charged in this horrific crime, not even as an accomplice or an accessory. But although she escaped formal charges, she never quite escaped the public's suspicion, and rightfully so. Despite Shanann appearing happily married in her online marketing videos for work, text messages from Shanann to friends indicating she was having serious marital woes and that Chris had been acting cold towards her on a vacation in North Carolina would soon be disclosed. These text messages would shed a whole new light on this mystifying case, reinforcing Chris's motive for killing his own family. Later, text messages between Chris and Nicole would also be disclosed, indicating they'd been involved for some time and had no intentions of stopping. In fact, marriage was in the works, according to some details that emerged. Chris also indicated he wanted to be rid of his family to be with Nicole, and according to People, these were some of Nicole's bizarre internet searches both before and after the crime took place. Quote, "Did people hate Amber Frey?" Kessinger typed this into an internet search, invoking the name of the woman who was having an affair with Scott Peterson, who murdered his wife Lacey and their unborn child in 2002. Kessinger's internet searches about Frey on August 19th, 4 days after Chris Watts was arrested, also included queries about a book deal that Frey obtained along with Frey's net worth. So it was very clear what was on Nicole's mind at the time that the case broke to the public. She was clearly trying to gain financially. And here are a few more things that, according to People, Kessinger searched before the murders. On July 24th, she Googled the phrase, "Man I'm having an affair with says he wants to leave his wife." And on August 4th at 12:45 a.m., she searched for wedding dresses, according to the web history analyzed by investigators. And on August 8th, she searched Google on topics relating to, quote, "marrying your mistress." There are a lot more questionable facts surrounding Nicole's possible involvement with the Watts murder scheme, some that even suggest she may have been orchestrating an insurance hit job on the family for personal gain. So I'll attach an article below that lists them all in great detail. This article certainly made me think differently about her role in all of this. Her internet searches both before and after the murders are so bizarre, they speak volumes about what she was plotting for her new life at the expense of Shanann and the children.
What's going on?
So my friend, we were out of town for a business trip this weekend.
All right.
and I dropped her off at 2 o'clock this morning. Have you talked or heard from Shanann since she left for work this morning? Because I can't get a hold of her. I've called, I've texted. Her car's in the garage. Her shoes she wears every single day are by the front door.
Shanann's friend, Nicole Atkinson, is the reason Chris Watts was caught as rapidly as he was. She had been in contact with Shanann while Shanann was on a business trip to Arizona the day before her death. When a 15 weeks pregnant Shanann fell ill during the trip, she made arrangements to have a doctor's appointment as soon as she returned home the following morning. Nicole immediately followed up with Shanann in the morning to see if she was feeling better, but couldn't get in touch with her. This prompted Nicole to visit Shanann's home to ensure she had made it to her doctor's appointment, and this is where many alarming red flags began to crop up. When she arrived at the Watts residence, it was to discover that Shanann's vehicle was parked in the garage, yet she was getting no answer from her cell phone. Worried that Shanann, a diabetic, could have possibly passed out inside, Nicole called the police to perform a welfare check. When the police arrived and searched the perimeter of the home, they could not contact Shanann. They only saw that her vehicle was still there. They soon called Chris, who returned from work, insisting she was there when he left in the morning and that she said she would be taking the children for a play date. After Chris arrived, he, Nicole, and the police officers searched the home to no avail. They found only Shanann's purse and cell phone, indicating that something unusual had driven her from the home. From there, the suspicions surrounding Chris Watts began to mount and would eventually result in his interrogation and arrest.
She came home from the airport 2 a.m. and I left around 5:15. She was still here. But if somebody has her and they're not safe, like, I want them back now. If they're not safe, last night I had every light in the house on. I was hoping that I would just ran over by the kids running in the door and just like barrel rushing me, but it didn't happen.
I can't imagine what you're going through right now.
The house, I couldn't sleep at all last night. I missed them throwing chicken nuggets at me, honestly, last night.
When Shanann and the children were first reported missing following a police welfare check that did not locate them inside the house, Chris Watts appeared on local news stations pleading for Shanann to come home and feigning concern for her and the kids. During these TV segments, he seemed empty and detached, and it's no wonder why. The entire time, he was putting on a clever ruse for the public, pretending to be concerned when in truth, he knew exactly where they were and exactly what had become of them because he was solely responsible for their ultimate fates.
Loaded my stuff up in my coolers, my water jugs, my book bag, my computers, some of the tools that I had from the toolbox. I knew I was going to have to do some pumping unit rubbers today. That's why I was out so far.
One of the most mind-blowing aspects of this case, which is just so hair-raising and unlike anything I've seen in any other true crime case, is that on the morning of the disappearance of Shanann Watts and her children, Chris, a police officer, and the next-door neighbor gathered in the neighbor's house to watch surveillance footage in an effort to see Shanann possibly leaving the house. However, she never did. During this rather unnerving viewing, the footage showed Chris reversing his pickup truck into the garage around 5 a.m. and supposedly loading his tools for work. During this segment of the footage, Chris's body language is very telling. He soon becomes increasingly agitated to the point where he holds his head and looks freaked out as the footage progresses. Once the footage was complete and Shanann never surfaced, Chris left and the police officer spoke to the neighbor in his absence. The neighbor then lets on that he suspects that Chris is involved with the disappearance of his wife because he was wigging the fuck out during the viewing of the footage and because he typically never backs his truck into the garage to load it for work. The neighbor insisted that this was atypical behavior for Chris, and this would explain why Chris was freaking out during the viewing. We would come to learn that in that moment, Chris was watching himself load the dead bodies of his wife and daughters into his truck while standing alongside a freaking police officer who was investigating their disappearance. It does not get any more mind-blowing than that.
I just find it hard to hear you talk about just having this emotional, conversation with Shanann, and you're bawling and crying together, and you have not shed one tear in 2 days that you've been here.
No.
Not one. And help me understand that, because I don't get it. These are your baby girls, and you have not shed one tear over them not being around.
During the police interrogation, Chris Watts exhibited cold and detached behavior. He showed little to no emotion when discussing the disappearance of his family, which raised suspicions among investigators. He eventually failed a polygraph test administered by the FBI, which was a turning point in the investigation. His inability to maintain his lies under pressure led to his eventual confession after he was goaded into this through what appeared to be the Reed interrogation technique used by a female detective. She essentially offered him a lifeline by making the killing of Shanann seem morally justifiable, and he clung to this lifeline for dear life. Taking the bait, he lied and said Shanann had killed the 2 girls first, so he in turn killed her in a blind rage. However, later, once the jig was up, Chris would admit to killing the girls himself and walked back the false accusation that Shanann had killed them.
We did it again. So pink means...
That's just the test.
I know. It just says the pink is going to be girls.
I don't know. Just the test.
That's awesome.
Suffice it to say, murdering your pregnant wife in cold blood is a whole nother level of diabolical. Most people are aware that Shanann was pregnant at the time of the murder, but what they don't realize is that the 15-week-old fetus, named Nico, was partially birthed during the struggle. When it was all said and done, Shanann was buried in a shallow grave a short distance from her daughters at Chris's worksite. The autopsy report found that Shanann was in her 2nd trimester of pregnancy and that the, quote, largely decomposed fetus and placental unit was found expelled from the gravid uterus. Also, the umbilical cord and a, quote, ruptured placental disc were also found with the body. I simply have no words for how unspeakably heart-wrenching that is.
Hello. Hey, wait, we gotta stop.
We gotta stop before we go across the road. Look both
Remember?
ways.
Look both ways. Your hair came out.
Yeah, she pulled them out.
Pulled him out. Hey, no cars coming. Hi, Cece.
Careful. Careful, boo.
Careful, sweetheart.
This is how she does it.
Tiny but brave 4-year-old Bella fought back and pleaded for her life as Chris suffocated her. 3-year-old Celeste was then killed in a similar manner after witnessing her sister's murder. I cannot begin to imagine the terror and sense of betrayal these small children must have experienced, seeing the man they loved and adored as their hero and protector suddenly harm them in the most brutal fashion, as though they were mere strangers to him, as though their lives amounted to absolutely nothing but an inconvenience to his selfish pursuits. Following this savage, soulless act, he later dumped the girls into giant oil batteries at his worksite. I cannot think of a more dreadful or cruel fate for 3 and 4-year-old baby girls. The depths that a human must sink to in order to perform such an act is so petrifying as to be unthinkable. It's also reported that he squeezed them into holes that were no more than 8 inches around, meaning they had to be forced through a space smaller than the breadth of a ruler, and their bodies were likely broken in the process. Later, when investigators attempted to remove them from the tanks, their flesh reportedly slid away due to the conditions caused by the crude chemicals they were dumped into, as well as the high temperatures inside the tanks, which caused advanced stages of decomposition.
Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are a senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime. And equally aggravating in this court's determination is the despicable act of disposing of the bodies in the manner in which they were done in this case. I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could objectively say that this is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen.
It was always a little strange that she always said a lot of things about Chris in front of me that I didn't like. It was just on and on and on, and I just got a bad feeling.
And they got married in 2012. Did they get married in North Carolina?
They did. Mm-hmm.
How was that?
We didn't attend.
Really?
Mm-mm. We didn't attend because Shanann and I just couldn't get along.
One of the most disturbing and irritating aspects of this case for me was the behavior of the mother of Chris Watts, Cece Watts, following his confession. Her conduct went far beyond a loving and forgiving mother and bordered on complicity, encouragement, emotional incest, justification of the crime, and victim blaming. This is such a twisted, remorseless ghoul of a woman who, during Chris's sentencing, chose to spend her speech time forgiving him for brutally murdering her daughter-in-law and 2 small grandchildren in cold blood and disposing of their bodies in the most heinous ways imaginable. She was also later heard on a recorded prison call hinting that she understood why Chris was driven to do what he did because, quote, "we know how she was."
And that we support you 100%. We know what she was like. Okay? We just love you. And they can record all they want.
I know, but just remember, like, she was a wonderful woman too, okay?
We know that.
And in that quote, she was referencing Shanann. The mother's defense of Chris's actions was so stomach-turning and appalling that even the cold-blooded, psychopathic murderer himself had to stop his mother and correct her and remind her that Shanann was a good woman who didn't deserve what happened to her. Chris having to defend his murder victim from this vile, hate-filled harpy of a woman is commentary enough on how truly evil she is and how in many ways she was complicit in his crimes, or at the very least implicitly encouraged them.